Hi everyone. In the previous video, we have learned that how we can use the group by clause to group the data and get the desired number on that group. Now in this video, we'll try to learn having clause. Now the first question arises in anyone's mind. By the way, that's an interview question, that why we use a having clause, right? We need to understand why we use a having clause. So I'll jump to the query. I'll show you the code that how we can use the having clause, but before that we need to understand why we use a having clause. That is even more important question. So we use a having clause to filter the data. We use the having clause to filter the data. Now the question arises is that if we want to filter the data, we already have where clause, right? When we have a where clause to filter the data, then why to use a having clause? जब ऑलरेडी वेयर क्लॉज है आपके पास तो फिर हैविंग क्लॉज क्यों यूज करना, राइट? सो फॉर दैट आई विल गिव यू एन एग्जांपल एंड इट विल बी क्लियर टू यू दैट व्हाई वी यूज अ हैविंग क्लॉज टू फिल्टर द डेटा, राइट? Now we have one assignment question. I'll simply copy the question and we'll try to write the SQL query for this. What is the question? Retrieve the job roles which have only 2 employees in that. I'll be using the same data set. Select star from EMP. We have 14 number of records. Now the question says that I wanted to see only those job roles or those designation which contains only 2 employees, right? Which contains only 2 employees. So how we will be writing the query for this? We'll say select. I wanted to see job, right? Job roles. And then I need to see the count. Count of star. Select job, comma count of star from EMP table, and then I need to say group by job. एक थंब रूल जो आपको हमेशा याद रखना है वो ये है कि कोई भी कॉलम अगर आप रिट्रीव कर रहे हैं और उसके साथ आपने कोई एग्रीगेट फंक्शन रिट्रीव किया हुआ है, सो दैट कॉलम मस्ट बी पार्ट ऑफ अ ग्रुप बाय क्लॉज, राइट? दैट कॉलम must be part of a group by clause. If I remove this group by clause and if I try to run the query, this query will not work. It is giving you an error, not a single group function, right? So the rule says that if you are retrieving a column along with the aggregate function, any of the aggregate function, sum, max, average, mean, count, that column must be part of a group by clause. ये rule है and you have to memorize this rule. So we have to say group by job, right? Now if I run this entire query, you will be getting your job and then the respective count of that particular group, because I said group by job. क्लर्क का उसने अलग एक ग्रुप क्रिएट किया है, सेल्समैन का अलग एक ग्रुप क्रिएट किया है, एनालिस्ट का, मैनेजर का और प्रेसिडेंट का अलग एक ग्रुप है. क्वेश्चन सेज दैट retrieve the job roles which have only 2 employees in that, right? So for that I'll be using a having clause. I will say having count of star should be equals to 2, right? If you run this query, you will be getting only that particular job role which contains only 2 employees, right? But my question remains the same, that why we are using a having clause when we have a where clause available, right? So I'll give you a wrong syntax. I'll write a wrong syntax and then we'll try to run the query. Can I say like this, where count of star equals to 2? ऐसा लिख सकते हैं क्या? If I try to run the query, it will give me an error, right? What is the error? SQL command not properly ended. That means the rule says that you cannot use aggregate function along with the where clause. You cannot use aggregate function with where clause to filter the data. If you want to filter the data on the basis of aggregate function, you have to use having clause. Try running this query and we'll be getting the result that we have analyst job role which has 2 people in that, right? So let me come back to the basic question, why we use a having clause. we use a having clause because we cannot use aggregate function with where clause, and that is the reason we are using having clause. So if you want to make a filter on the basis of a aggregate function, we have to utilize having clause, right? We can have multiple questions where we can use the having clause. Now for example, I wanted to calculate sum of salary department wise. Now I want to make a filter. I only wanted to see data for those record whose sum of salary is greater than 9,000, right? Whose sum of salary is greater than 9,000. So how we can write the query? So first of all, we need to form the SQL query with the aggregate function and with the group by clause. That is mandatory. At the last, we'll apply the having clause to make a filter, right? So we can say select DPT number, comma, sum of salary from EMP table. Of course, I told you the rule. If you are retrieving a existing column along with the aggregate function, that column must be part of a group by clause. So we can say group by DPT number. You run this portion. So in that way only you form a query. First you write the first portion, then you try adding something, right? So this is the data for department number 10, 20 and 30. And this is the respective sum of salary, right? Now I can say that now I wanted to see that who is having greater sum of salary than 9,000, right? So for that I need to use a having clause, right? Having sum of salary greater than 9,000, right? You try running this query. Now we only have two departments where sum of salary is greater than 9,000. That means department number 10, we are spending less money in terms of salary. Whatever employees are there in department number 10, we are spending less money on that. But for department number 20 and 30, we are spending more money than department number 10. This is how you can compare your data, right? Now what can be the next question? The next question can be that I wanted to see those job roles where we have more than 2 employees. Not exactly the 2 employees, but when we have more than 2 employees, right? So first of all, I told you write the group by wala query. So we can say select job, comma, count of star from EMP table, group by job. And then I need to apply a clause called having clause to make a filter on the aggregate function where count of star should be greater than 2. I'm not saying equals to 2, I'm saying greater than 2, right? Now these are the job roles where we have employee more than 2, right? For clerk we have 4 members, for salesman we have 4 members, and for manager we have 3 members, right? This is how we can apply a having clause. So the basic idea I hope I have given you in this video. Why we use a having clause? Because we cannot use aggregate function with where clause. Where clause के साथ aggregate function use नहीं कर सकते हैं, इसीलिए we use aggregate function with having clause to make a filter, to filter the data on the basis of aggregate function. Okay, thank you so much for watching.